We're starting to see the first movement in the veteran quarterback market, and how those dominoes fall will have a big impact on the type of trade value the Chicago Bears can get for the number one overall pick in the NFL draft.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer for Locked On Bears listeners. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. On the show today, we look at all the different moving pieces in the veteran quarterback market that all the other teams will be involved in to see what the Chicago Bears need to happen to get the most in trade value for their number one overall pick. We'll look at some of the recent rumblings about Derek Carr and Lamar Jackson and their potential moves. We'll look at the teams that really matter the most to what the Bears are going to be able to get for that number one overall pick. And we'll look at some of the wildcards in this equation that really unknown at this point that could swing things in significant ways, either for the Chicago Bears' favor or against it. What kind of brought this out for me was the Derek Carr news that came out over the weekend, just before the Super Bowl, that the Raiders and Saints had discussed a Derek Carr trade, but Derek Carr has a no-trade clause and was not interested in that trade because he didn't want to have to change his contract. He's due like $40 million guaranteed on Tuesday, and the idea was that he might have to sacrifice some of that in order to make the deal work with the Saints. He said no, and so now the Raiders do plan to release him, or are expected to release him, ahead of that money becoming guaranteed, which would then make Derek Carr a free agent and could still lead him to the New Orleans Saints, but just different negotiating at that point, and as a result, the Raiders not getting anything in return for their veteran quarterbacks that they've been clearly ready to move on for. Because I think from a Chicago Bears perspective, they're going to be keeping a close eye on where all these quarterback-needy teams end up getting their quarterback and where the available quarterbacks end up going. Because Ryan Poles will want as much interest in drafting a quarterback by other teams and as much competition among teams to try and compete to trade up for that number one spot. He needs teams bidding against each other. He needs multiple teams to want to get up to the number one pick to draft a quarterback. And that means multiple teams to go through free agency without securing their surefire veteran starting quarterback and needing to be desperate in the draft to potentially land their guy. So, for example, with Derek Carr, it would be very good for the Chicago Bears if he ends up with the New Orleans Saints, because the New Orleans Saints are a quarterback-needy team, but not a quarterback-needy team in any position to trade up to the number one overall pick. They have the 30th pick in the draft, I believe is their first pick in the first round this year through the trades. They got rid of their original first-round pick and got, I think, the Chiefs' first-round pick when it's all said and done. The Bears are not going to trade that far down. The Saints are not a realistic option to get up to the number one overall pick. And so from a Bears perspective then, you want the Saints to be one of the teams that for sure takes a veteran quarterback off of the market. So that veteran quarterback doesn't instead go to one of the other quarterback-needy teams that could be in a better position to trade up to the number one overall pick. We want to see something similar, I think, from another NFC South team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. with Tom Brady retiring, they do have Kyle Trask. It's not super clear what exactly they're going to do at the quarterback position. Some people have floated out Jimmy Garoppolo and some of the other veteran options. Maybe they could draft someone as well if they're just already not in love with Trask, but that feels a little quick. They're a little bit of a wild card, but they're also one of these teams that isn't a real trade partner for the Chicago Bears, where they're drafting in the 20s. And so ideally for Chicago, Tampa Bay also takes one of these other veteran quarterbacks off the market, whether it's Jimmy Garoppolo, whether it's, there's kind of a mixed bag of guys that might become available that might not. But like if Daniel Jones maybe becomes available, Andy Dalton will be a free agent again. Jameis Winston expected to become a free agent. People have floated him out as a possibility for Tampa Bay. Any of these veteran quarterbacks that another quarterback needy team might be interested in, if Tampa could take one of them off the market, that would be very helpful for the Bears. The other thing that would be best for Chicago is if some of the teams that are maybe on the fence about moving on from their quarterback, if they could hold on to their quarterbacks, that would be helpful as well. Particularly, it's weird to say, but Chicago Bears fans should be hoping that Aaron Rodgers stays on the Green Bay Packers this offseason. I've been thinking about doing a whole podcast about that, and we might still kind of break down why that would be better for the Bears once Rodgers emerges from this 4-day darkness retreat. But the point being that if Rodgers leaves Green Bay, that would be another veteran quarterback available, and the Packers wouldn't need to replace him because they have Jordan Love, right? They would be one more quarterback added to the market and not adding one more quarterback needy team as a result. Same kind of thing with Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. It's like they have Tyler Huntley. So, ideally, I think Lamar Jackson stays in Baltimore and Lamar doesn't then go to one of these other quarterback needy teams that could trade for the Bears, right? And if Lamar leaves Baltimore, they're not in a great position to get up to one, given how late they're picking this draft. And I'll also throw Trey Lance in that equation, where Jimmy Garoppolo is probably going to leave the 49ers, but Trey Lance is kind of up in the air, with Brock Purdy and Trey Lance. If the 49ers were to trade Lance to another team, that might be, another team off the market that no longer wants to draft a quarterback and would just go with Lance instead of actually drafting a guy and wouldn't then be trading up to get to the number 1 overall pick. So you kind of have to hope that some of these quarterbacks just stay put and that the veteran quarterbacks go to the teams that don't want or aren't in a position to trade for that number 1 overall pick. Really, there's 4-ish main teams that you got to hope don't get a surefire veteran. And I think some are more likely to than others. We'll go through the teams we should really be watching most closely for the Chicago Bears next on Locked On Bears. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. BetterHelp is here to help you work through your problems. When you're not at your best, you can't be your best, right? You can do so many great things when you're really feeling your fullest. But when life gets you bogged down and you might feel overwhelmed or just not showing up in the way that you want to, working with a therapist can help you get closer to the best version of yourself. I do online therapy every single week, and it's a really important part of my mental health regimen. And I can't recommend it enough to everyone. Whether you feel like you have a massive need for it, or maybe you're just feeling like a little help here or there could be helpful, it's worth it. Trust me, you don't have to be on the edge. You don't have to be in a crisis to feel like you need therapy. It's just so good for you. I always say, in the same way that I go to the gym to help take care of my body, I go to therapy to help take care of my mind. I'm not going to the gym because something's broken in my body, but just to help it be stronger. And therapy can be very similar for you. So if you want to live a more empowered life, therapy can get you there. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We know there are 4 main teams that every mock draft with trades will link the Chicago Bears to most often. And all 4 of those teams are teams that need quarterbacks, but are drafting close enough to the number 1 overall pick that they could presumably get to that spot and offer a package the Bears would be interested in and not have the Bears move so far down that they really feel like they're missing out on ability to still add a very talented first-round pick. The 4 teams, of course, the Houston Texans at 2, the Indianapolis Colts at 4, and then it's the Raiders and the Panthers at 7 and 9, I believe, off the top of my head there. And I think a few of those teams, each one has the opportunity to certainly add a veteran quarterback, but I think a couple of them are more likely than others when it's all said and done. Let's start sort of in draft order here. These are, again, the teams you don't want to see add a veteran quarterback starter. The Houston Texans are interesting here because new head coach, new staff, but your head coach and your offensive coordinator, DeMeco Ryans, and then the offensive coordinator now, Bobby Slowick, both coming over from the San Francisco 49ers. By the way, Bobby Slowick, a former coworker of mine, a great individual human being, a really smart football mind, and I know he's going to do a great job with Houston. Really rooting for that guy on a personal level. But when you have 49ers defensive coordinator and a 49ers offensive assistant now running the Houston Texans as a team, you can't help but wonder if they would be interested in either Jimmy Garoppolo or Trey Lance. They were around for both of Trey Lance's seasons that have been very short and limited, but have been there through training camp, through OTAs, know him inside and out. We don't know how much the 49ers would really want to give up Trey Lance. It's just given how Brock Purdy played last season and how unproven Trey Lance is. If you're the 49ers and you could get a pretty good haul for Trey Lance and still have Brock Purdy, do you take that and kind of go with the sure thing of whatever the Texans will give you versus trying to still ride that out and see if maybe Lance can be a better quarterback? Garoppolo, of course, the veteran, going to be hitting the open market here and could be the guy that could be a real stabilizing force for the Texans. Now, they also have Davis Mills. And, a lot of people in Houston are high on Davis Mills as, a third-round pick last year who's ascending, or I guess 2 years ago now, who's, has some upside still there. But again, it wasn't this coaching staff and this offensive coordinator that were all in on Davis Mills. So we don't know exactly, A, how this Texans coaching staff thinks about their own quarterbacks, and B, it'll say a lot how they think about these 49ers quarterbacks, right? I think it'll say a lot about what that coaching staff thought of Trey Lance, if the Texans are interested in him or not. And same thing with Jimmy Garoppolo. I think we'll find out some hard truths either way about those two quarterbacks and their potential availability. Those seem like the main options for Houston. I don't know that they're a team that's like, they're not going to go out and try to get Aaron Rodgers, right? They're much more longer term, bigger picture here. But the 49ers familiarity makes me nervous about them as a team that maybe wouldn't want to trade up to number 2 or to trade up from 2 to 1 if they had Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance. The Indianapolis Colts feel like a little bit more of like a going to draft a quarterback type of team. They're reportedly going to hire the Eagles offensive coordinator, Shane Steichen. I don't know how to pronounce that yet. They still have Matt Ryan and Nick Foles under contract, but both of those guys are 1 foot into the senior living facility, so I don't imagine they're going to be part of the plans there. You wonder if Indianapolis is tired of cycling through old veteran quarterbacks, like Matt Ryan, like Nick Foles, like Phillip Rivers before them, like Carson Wentz in there as well. And if ownership in the front office there is ready to say, oh, let's slow it down here, let's draft a quarterback and develop him. Now, I think a guy like Steichen is not going to come in and have this huge pressure to win right now. He's going to be able to get his guy and run his offense. So I would imagine they're more likely to be a team that's not going to acquire a veteran quarterback and more likely to be a trade partner to move up to the number 1 overall pick. The Raiders feel like kind of the opposite of that, right? You have all this pressure on Josh McDaniels. I kept thinking Mike McDaniels from the Dolphins. Josh McDaniels to win, right? These Raiders teams have massively underachieved and things have gone poorly for him. Plus, you add on the Aaron Rodgers interest in playing with Devontae Adams and those kind of rumors. Also, Josh McDaniels, very familiar with Jimmy Garoppolo from their time in New England, and it feels like the Raiders might be the most likely of all these teams to go with the veteran quarterback and not want to trade up to 1 and say, screw it, we need to win some games with Jimmy G or Aaron Rodgers. These guys are going to give us a better chance to win now than Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, whoever they would want to take with that number 1 overall pick. The Panthers are an interesting team here, the 4th one of these 4, because, they bring in Frank Reich, and Reich said right away, he wants to get his guy at quarterback. I think he used the word stability and talks about having a true franchise quarterback. Felt like he didn't have that stability in Indianapolis. That's not a guy to me who sounds like he's going to go get 2 years of Aaron Rodgers and then need a new quarterback again. That doesn't sound like a guy to me who's going to go sign Mitch Trubisky and have a quarterback competition and not really know who your quarterback is and just try and battle through that. He wants the guy, like a long-term answer at quarterback, which at first sounds like, number 1 overall pick. Definitely think that's in the mix for them. But I could also see Frank Reich looking at the situation and saying, okay, well, if Lamar Jackson is available via trade, there's a stability and a franchise quarterback that you go trade for. And I wonder if Trey Lance is in that conversation, not nearly not as proven in terms of stability, but if he could view Trey Lance similar to drafting a quarterback, where it's like, this is our guy, we're going to invest in him, go all in on this quarterback. Like Lance and Lamar seem like the two non-rookie trade options that could satisfy this idea for Frank Reich of having stability in a franchise guy that I don't think the other veterans on the market will be able to quite provide, but Lamar or Lance feels like the only way to do that without taking a quarterback high in this draft and being a very true trade partner for the Chicago Bears. So those are the four that matter. Again, feels like Colts and Panthers probably more in the draft the quarterback spot. Texans are kind of, I don't want to say 50-50, but are more of a coin toss in my mind. And then the Raiders feel more like a team that's probably going to acquire a veteran quarterback between now and draft day, and likely not going to be as much of a contender for that number one overall pick. But the more desperate those four teams are entering the draft, the better for the Bears' trade value to trade down. Now, all that being said, there are some wild cards here that I think can really shake things up. Not only wild card teams, but also a couple of wild card players that could get into this mix. And if one team does one thing or one player does one thing in this direction, that could lead to another team doing things differently than they were going to plan. And all of a sudden, the trade market for the number one overall pick gets shaken up pretty drastically, while the Bears are kind of just waiting for the desperate teams to come with their best offers. So we'll kind of look at what feels most up in the air and most like volatile in this equation next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our partners at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Now that the football season is over, it doesn't mean the fun is over at FanDuel. Certainly the NBA season is right in the midpoint. The playoffs are right around the corner. You've got, we're less than a month away from March Madness and all sorts of different ways you can bet with our friends at FanDuel, because new customers are going to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's free bonus bets right back to you if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and even three-pointers drain in this NBA season. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlays. So don't miss this chance to get your no-sweat first bet for up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA and the NFL. So a lot of this is out of Ryan Poles' control, how these quarterbacks shake out. He and Bears fans just need to hope that it shakes out in a way that leaves a couple of desperate teams trying to get to that number one overall pick to make sure they get their quarterback, and the bidding war gives the Chicago Bears the biggest return on investment possible. But there are a couple teams in here that you just don't know what they're going to do, and that could throw some things off in trying to figure this out. Let's start with the Tennessee Titans. There have been some, I'll say, unsubstantiated rumors about them inquiring about the number one overall pick. I mean, it's kind of come from one place, and we haven't really heard that much else. And doesn't mean it's not true. It just doesn't mean we don't really have a good, clear answer on there. That the idea is that the Titans would move on from Ryan Tannehill and then go for a younger quarterback there. But then, it becomes a wild card there, because then does Tannehill get traded? And if so, to one of these quarterback needy teams, with the Raiders or the Texans even, or the Panthers want Ryan Tannehill? Would they see that as stability for them at quarterback? Or, could he go to one of these other teams, or do other teams not view Tannehill as a guaranteed starter, and he would enter the sort of Mitch Trubisky, Daniel Jones backup competition type role? But then, if the Titans trade Tannehill and are looking for a quarterback, like, are they interested in going up to one, or are they going to just kind of wait? And does that take away some of the value of the Bears trade? Does it take away some of the demand for the number one overall pick? It's like one of those spots where I can't tell if it's good, or it's good if they want to go up to one, but if they ditch Tannehill and don't want to get up to one, then you're just adding another quarterback into the veteran market without adding another quarterback needy team that will trade up to the number one overall pick. So that's kind of a funky spot there. Similarly funky spot, the New York Giants with Daniel Jones. He's set to be a free agent. The Giants have expressed interest in bringing him back, but they also want to bring back Saquon Barkley. They only have one franchise tag to use there, and I don't know. Are you sold on Daniel Jones as like a surefire quarterback that you want to pay a lot of money to long term? I don't quite feel that way. He played a lot better this season, but I still have real questions about Daniel Jones. But then would other NFL teams have questions about Daniel Jones? If they let him walk, don't re-sign him, aren't able to pay him what they want to, they would then become a team that needs a quarterback. But they're also drafting too far down to trade up to number one. So you would be adding another quarterback to the market and not another team that would want to trade up to one. So I think that could be bad for the Bears. But if Daniel Jones is not a quarterback that other teams view as a starter, then the Giants just become another quarterback needy team. Maybe they take Garoppolo off the market, or they take, Rodgers or Andy Dalton or whoever off the market. And then that's one less quarterback available for other quarterback needy teams. And if they don't view Daniel Jones as the solution, then maybe it can be a good thing for the Bears if it just creates another team that needs a quarterback that can take a veteran and reduce the supply of veteran quarterbacks for the real trade partners that the Bears could be with. I also think the Jets are a really big wild card in here because we've heard that they're going to try and go all in on trading for Aaron Rodgers, so that might be their path. If they can't get Rodgers, do they go after Jimmy Garoppolo or another one of these veteran quarterbacks? Or, they're picking number 13. It's pretty far to go up to number 1. But could they be a dark horse team? I haven't heard anything about that. It's purely speculation on my part. But 13's a little far for the Bears to go. But desperate teams call for desperate measures. And I don't know if they're a little bit scarred by drafting Zach Wilson so high that they wouldn't want to trade up all the way. But I don't know, that feels like a team that could do 1,000 different things at quarterback. They could stick with Zach Wilson again and just try and make that work, right? They're all over the whole spectrum of quarterback here that make them quite a bit of a wild card for me in this quarterback quarterback carousel. And then the other wild card here is Tom Brady, because we've already seen him unretire once. He filed his paperwork this time. It would be much more of a hassle for him to unretire this time. It feels maybe a little more serious this time. He's in a very different spot in his life this time. But he's also a guy that, it's going to be hard for him to stay away from the NFL game. And he's already said he's not going to go into broadcasting until 2024 anyway. So he's going to be off this year. So is he a guy who could unretire and go to a different team? Could he fill that Raiders slot? We talked about Rodgers and Jimmy G, but of course, Tom Brady has the ultimate Josh McDaniels connection there. That would then be another potential trade team for the Bears. That's off the board there. I don't think they would sign Brady and trade all the way up to number 1. If you're signing Brady, you're going all in on winning this year for the 1 year maybe that you're going to have Tom Brady. Or, if he returns to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, then that's another team off of the market that isn't going to add a different veteran quarterback that would then leave more veteran quarterbacks to go to more other needy teams and maybe less teams than trying to trade up to that number 1 overall pick. So you can never count out Tom Brady in some of this equation. And ultimately, I want to circle back to Lamar Jackson in here too as one of the wild cards here for the Ravens. Yes, they have Tyler Huntley and seem to very much like Tyler Huntley as a backup. He was in the Pro Bowl, which was the weirdest thing to me. I still don't understand how he got the nod as one of the replacements in the Pro Bowl, despite playing 3 or 4 games this season. We've seen Tyler Huntley be really good. But if the Ravens trade Lamar Jackson to a team and get a haul of draft picks, let's even say the Carolina Panthers, they get the Panthers first round pick, maybe a future first round pick from them, and then, a player, whatever, a big haul for Lamar Jackson. All of a sudden, it's the Ravens that are sitting on that 9th overall pick. And then could the Ravens use the haul from Lamar Jackson to trade up to number 1 from wherever they get that first round pick for Lamar Jackson? So it wouldn't be the Ravens moving up from, where is their original first round pick? 23 is their pick right now. It wouldn't be them going from 23 to 1, but could it be them going from 9 to 1 if they traded Lamar to the Panthers, or I don't know, the Tennessee Titans traded for Lamar Jackson, or the Jets at 13, right? Or the Colts. Any of these quarterback needy teams, if one of them trades for Lamar Jackson, the Ravens are likely going to get that their first round pick this year, plus future draft picks and a whole assortment of draft capital. Could the Ravens then use all that new draft capital to get to the number one overall pick and become a team that could be in the market for that? And all of a sudden, if you're Baltimore, you can still start Tyler Huntley this year and have the number one overall pick quarterback waiting in the wings on the bench, or maybe you have them compete, right? I mean, Tyler Huntley's been good, but are you going to hand the keys to the franchise over to a third-year former undrafted free agent who spent his first couple of seasons on the practice squad? Like, again, I'm not trying to disparage Tyler Huntley, but he is not a proven franchise quarterback. And so when if the Ravens were to trade Lamar Jackson, which the report was this weekend that if they franchise tag him, they might listen to offers, do they then become a team that somehow, some way is in the mix to trade up to the number one overall pick? I mean, wouldn't that be interesting if they get, I keep using Carolina as an example. That's just the one that seems to make the most immediate sense to me. Like if they get the Panthers number 9 pick and then use that pick plus 23 plus, a future pick or whatever to get to 1. And then all of a sudden they replace Lamar Jackson with Bryce Young and run a similar sort of thing, but with, even smaller quarterback. But you know what I mean? Like, you just wonder if a team like the Ravens can be a big wild card in this. That's what's so interesting to me. It's like some of these teams that we don't see right now as primary trade options for the Bears could all of a sudden become a real trade option for the Bears at number 1. And if they're competing then with Baltimore trying to get to 1, if they're competing with Indianapolis, I was thinking Baltimore Colts in my head. What am I, 65 years old? But you know what I mean? Like, then all of a sudden you can add new competition from new teams in that trade up market. So it's going to be a really interesting offseason. All the quarterback movement. The Bears aren't going to be involved in any of the veterans coming to them, but it's still worth keeping an eye on where these veteran quarterbacks go and how that sets up the trade market for Ryan Poles looking to move that number 1 overall pick. When we get any significant quarterback developments that might affect your Chicago Bears, you can be sure we'll break it all down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Also, make sure to check out the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. Leave us a comment, a like on the video, hit that subscribe button, click the little bell to be notified every time we post a new daily podcast for you as well. And wherever you listen, thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Make sure you come on back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.